Okay, so if you've been working with JavaScript for any length of time now, you've probably heard people refer to it as a prototype-based language. They'll say that you can do object-oriented things with it, but it's not a class-based language, it's a prototype-based language. So what are they talking about? What does this mean? What is this prototype thing? Alright, I want to take an object here that has absolutely nothing inside of it. So I've got the most basic object that you can imagine. This object, if I were to add a property inside of here, let's say I've got a property called prop1, and let's say that that is a function. This function is going to do nothing more than console log prop1. Okay. I have an object, and it's got one property inside of it. I could, if I wanted, write obj.prop1. That is going to call that function. If I run this, there we go. It wrote out prop1, because that's what the prop1 property of obj does. It's a function that writes this out. So what if I write ob.toString, and I run that code? I'm not getting an error. The reason I'm not getting an error is this has somehow magically been attached to my object. That's because every object that you create in JavaScript has a prototype object. It's like if you were going to build something in the real world. The first one that you build is the prototype. It's the one that you're basing all the other ones off of. In JavaScript, when you create an object, you automatically get a prototype object attached. That prototype object is the object prototype. It is going to have all of those default things that the main parent object has. Methods like toString, value of, is prototype of, has own property. There's a list of about 12 or 15 properties. But every single object in JavaScript inherits those properties. They're able to use those properties. So I've created an object here, but what I really got was two things. I got the object, and I got its prototype. This means if I'm to create an object and I call a method, if the method that I call, for example, obj.prop2, let's say I was trying to call prop2, now this is going to throw an error because I don't have that inside of obj. But what JavaScript is going to do for me is it's going to go up to my prototype and check, hey, you know what, in the prototype, do you have a method called prop2? If it's not there, it goes to that object's prototype, and so on, all the way up the chain, until you get to the final object prototype, and then its prototype points to null. So if you ever look at a prototype and you check and see if that prototype is equal to null, it means you've reached the end of the prototype chain. You don't have to do anything special to make this happen. This is just automatic behavior. I can have one object, and then I can point to the same object as I create a whole bunch more, using that one object as the prototype for all these other ones. So I've created this object with the property prop1. Now, let's say I'm going to create obj2, and that will have prop2 inside of it. Do the same sort of things we did the first time. We'll just create one simple method called console.log, and we'll write out prop2. Okay, nothing really exciting. Right now, this object has one property inside of it. Its prototype has all that default stuff, so I can call any of those methods, any of those properties, as well as the one that I've got here. Or we can actually call a set prototype of. This method allows us to say obj2 is going to use something else as its prototype. So I can say obj2, I want to use obj1 as my prototype. Now, obj2 can call its prop2 method, and obj2 can also call prop1, which of course is not going to work because I called this obj, not obj1. So let's just put the 1 on there since I've got obj1 here. Okay, Now clear that out, run this again, and there we are. Obj2 was able to run prop2 and prop1 because I made this first object. That is now the prototype for this one. It has the other object with all these things as its prototype. So I'm still able to do obj2.toString without worrying about an error happening. No error, because this was on the prototype chain. It was up 2 levels from my object 2. Object 2 used object 1 as its prototype. Object 1 uses the default object as its prototype, and then above that is null. So you can create these big long chains. The benefit to them is that when you create other objects that are copies of these things, you don't have to copy all the properties into every single one of them. So I could build one prototype, and then if I was going to make 100 other objects that had it as its prototype, I don't have to copy all the methods from the prototype into the 100 other objects. I just keep them in the prototype, and they just keep kind of a pointer back to the prototype, so it knows, well, if I don't have the property, maybe my prototype does. And JavaScript will automatically look back at the parent, at the prototype, to see, does it have that method? Does it have that property built into it? We can write loops like this. So I'm going to write out all the properties inside. I should declare that properly. So there they are. This is my loop right here that I'm running through, and I'm writing out, there's the properties that are inside of it. These are all the enumerable properties. Now remember I said that it will go looking up the prototype chain to get these other things? Well, it will, but not every property in JavaScript is an enumerable property. It's not something that you can loop through. It sits there, but when you do things like the for loops or for in loops, it's not going to list off all those parent properties. We have some other methods. We've got set prototype of to assign it. There's a get prototype of to find out which object is the prototype. If I have my obj2, let's get rid of that. Obj2, object dot get prototype of obj2. This is going to tell me obj1. This goes and fetches the prototype of object 2, which is object 1. So all this that I've written right here, this is the same thing as me writing obj1. I've got a pointer now to obj1, which means that I can call prop1. Now let's comment those out. We'll run this again, and there it is. There's prop1 running. I was able to do this because I went to the prototype and I got that method. If you ever want to discern between methods that belong to the object itself and methods that belong to its prototype, we have a method that we can actually use to do that. It's called getOwnPropertyNames. So object getOwnPropertyNames. Now I list off the object that I'm talking about, so obj2, and I want to console log this out. There we are. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm saying, okay, go get me a list of all the properties that belong specifically to object 2. So this prop2, that's the only thing that really belongs to obj2. We have access to other things, but prop2, this is the only property that belongs in this array right here. So this line right here was writing out the prop1. I run this again. There you can see it's just that. If I was to write this again with obj1, so obj2 only has one property, obj1 only has one property, and we could do this dot object get prototype of, object get prototype of, and then inside of here we could fetch any property we wanted, object 1, object 2, and then wrap all that with get on property names, so we could get the prototype of object 2 or the prototype of object 1 and ask for its own property names. So instead of object 2, its prototype was object 1. Object 1's prototype is that generic one at the very top. So let's say we want to object get prototype of object 1. So object 2 was our base, object 1 was the prototype of object 2. Now we're getting the prototype of object 1, and we're saying, okay, go get me the list of all the properties that are inside that one. There we are. Here's the list of all of those properties that I was talking about before. These are the things that belong in every object, because eventually, as you move up the prototype chain, eventually you get to this object right here, the one that has all these properties. So I can call these on any object whatsoever. A date object has a toString method. The string method has a toString method, the string object. The math object, any object, any HTML element, eventually, if you move up the prototype chain, eventually you will get to this object. So everything in JavaScript can call these methods. It's just something that's built in. And that is what prototypes are. It's just that parent prototype object that can hang on to properties for you. You can set the prototype. You can add things to the prototype. So if I add something to the prototype, it means that everybody that's inheriting from that prototype, or everybody that's pointing back at that prototype, will now have access to those methods as well. And that's where the real power of this comes from. There are a few other methods. I've got some other videos on those. We've got object.create is one way to create an object. Object.assign is another way to create an object. With object.create, you tell it, this is the prototype that I want to use. With object.assign, I say, this is the prototype that I want to use. The difference between them being that with the create, you are allowed to create custom properties right inside here, and with each of the properties that you're creating for your new object, you are also going to define whether it's readable, writable, enumerable, and so on. There's a bunch of other properties, and I'm going to have another video about that shortly. With object.assign, you set the prototype, and then you can just list off the properties. You don't have to create all the property descriptors to say, well, this one's enumerable, this one isn't. You just say, here's a list of the properties that I want to have in my new object. Okay, I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.